At a crowded airport, everyone ignored a struggling old woman, except one young stranger. She helped her without expecting anything in return. But minutes later, the airport staff suddenly surrounded them, because the old woman was hiding a shocking secret that would change the young woman's life forever. No one at the crowded airport noticed the old woman struggling near the check-in line. Travelers rushed past with rolling suitcases, eyes glued to their phones, focused only on catching their flights. The loudspeaker echoed with boarding announcements, and the giant glass windows reflected the busy morning sun. In the middle of that chaos, the old woman stood alone, holding a worn suitcase that looked almost too heavy for her trembling hands. Her grey hair was tied into a loose bun, and her coat looked a little too thin for the chilly air inside the terminal. She tried to lift the suitcase onto the scale but failed. A few people glanced at her, then quickly looked away. Everyone seemed too busy, except for one person. Emily Carter, a 26-year-old nurse from Seattle, was waiting for her flight to Chicago. She had spent the last week visiting her sister and was exhausted. After a long night shift at a volunteer clinic, all she wanted was coffee and a quiet seat by the gate. But when she saw the old woman struggling, something inside her wouldn't let her ignore it. Emily stepped out of line and walked over with a warm smile. "Hi, she said gently. "Do you need a little help with that?" The old woman looked surprised, as if she hadn't expected anyone to stop. Her tired eyes softened. "Oh dear, thank you, sweetheart. My arms aren't what they used to be." Emily lifted the suitcase easily and placed it on the scale. The old woman let out a small sigh of relief. "Thank you so much," she said. "People don't usually stop anymore." Emily smiled. "My grandma always said kindness is free, so I try to spend it whenever I can." The old woman chuckled quietly. While the airline agent finished the check-in process, Emily noticed the woman's hands shaking slightly. She looked nervous, almost lost. "Are you traveling alone?" Emily asked. "Yes," the woman replied softly. "It's been a long time since I flew anywhere." Emily suddenly felt protective of her. Airports could be overwhelming, especially for someone older. "If you'd like," Emily said, "I can walk with you to security. My flight isn't boarding for a while." The old woman looked at her with gratitude shining in her eyes. "You'd really do that for me?" "Of course," Emily said. They slowly walked together through the busy terminal. Emily helped her place her bag on the conveyor belt at security, and waited patiently while she passed through the scanner. When they reached the other side, the old woman smiled warmly. "You've been incredibly kind," she said. "Most people wouldn't bother." Emily shrugged lightly. "It's no big deal." But the old woman studied her face for a moment, as if quietly memorizing it. Then she said something that made Emily pause. "You remind me of someone very special." Emily tilted her head. "Who?" The old woman simply smiled. "You'll see." And somehow, the way she said it made Emily feel like their chance meeting wasn't an accident at all. Emily wasn't sure why the old woman's words stayed in her mind as they walked deeper into the airport terminal. Something about the way she had said, "You'll see," felt mysterious, almost like she knew something Emily didn't. They moved slowly through the crowd. The old woman leaned slightly on her cane while Emily walked beside her, keeping a careful eye to make sure she didn't get bumped by rushing travelers. "What gate are you heading to?" Emily asked. "Gate 22, the woman replied. Emily blinked in surprise. "That's actually my gate too." "Well," the old woman chuckled softly. "Looks like we are travel companions today." They reached a quiet seating area near the gate. Planes moved outside the giant windows, their engines humming softly as ground crews prepared them for departure. Emily helped the woman sit down and placed her small carry-on beside the chair. "Thank you again," the woman said warmly. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Emily waved it off. It really wasn't much. But the old woman shook her head gently. "You'd be surprised how rare kindness has become." For a moment they sat in comfortable silence, watching the planes outside. Then the woman turned toward Emily. "So tell me about yourself." Emily hesitated before answering. "Well, I'm a nurse. I work in a community clinic back in Seattle. That must be hard work. It can be, Emily admitted. But it's worth it. A lot of our patients can't afford proper healthcare. Sometimes just being there for them means everything. The old woman listened carefully, her eyes filled with quiet interest. And you help them anyway? Emily nodded. Someone has to. The woman smiled. But there was something deeper in her expression now, something thoughtful. You must have a very good heart. Emily laughed awkwardly. My bank account might disagree with that. Nurses don't exactly get rich. The old woman chuckled. Money isn't the only kind of wealth, dear. Emily looked down at the floor for a moment. Life hadn't always been easy. She had worked 2 jobs through college, taken student loans, and often skipped vacations just to make ends meet. Still, helping people had always felt right. Just then, the boarding announcement echoed through the gate area. Passengers for Flight 417 to Chicago were being called soon. The old woman slowly stood up, gripping her cane. Emily immediately offered her arm. Here, let me help. Thank you, sweetheart. As they joined the boarding line, the airline attendant suddenly looked at the old woman with a surprised expression. We've been expecting you. Emily frowned slightly. Expecting her? The attendant quickly spoke into a small radio, before turning back with a polite smile. Everything is ready. Emily noticed something strange. 2 airport staff members had suddenly appeared nearby, watching the old woman carefully, almost respectfully. Emily leaned closer and whispered, Do you travel a lot? The old woman smiled calmly. Not usually. Then she added quietly, But today is a very important trip. Emily had no idea just how important it really was. As Emily and the old woman slowly walked down the jet bridge, Emily couldn't shake the strange feeling growing in her chest. The airline staff had seemed unusually attentive the moment they saw the elderly passenger. It wasn't the kind of treatment most travelers received. The flight attendant standing at the aircraft door smiled warmly. Welcome aboard, Mrs. Whitmore. Emily noticed the respectful tone immediately. The old woman nodded politely and stepped inside with Emily beside her. Thank you, dear. The attendant then glanced at Emily. And welcome to you as well. Emily helped the woman find her seat near the front of the plane. It was wider than the standard seats, with extra space and a comfortable leather finish. Emily blinked in surprise. Wow, this is first class. The old woman chuckled softly. Oh my, is it? Emily laughed. You didn't notice when you booked the ticket. Someone helped me arrange the flight, she said calmly. Emily shrugged and helped place the carry-on bag in the overhead bin. Well, you definitely got the best seat on the plane. Just then, another flight attendant approached quickly. Mrs. Whitmore, if you need anything at all, please let us know. Her voice sounded almost nervous. The old woman simply smiled and thanked her. Emily walked a few rows back to her own seat in economy class. It didn't bother her. She was used to flying cheap. But she couldn't stop thinking about the odd way the crew had treated the woman. A few minutes later, the plane doors closed and the aircraft began to taxi toward the runway. Emily glanced forward and saw Mrs. Whitmore looking back at her with a gentle smile. Emily waved. The old woman raised her hand slightly in return. The flight lifted into the sky, clouds drifting beneath the wings as the plane climbed higher. About an hour into the flight, a flight attendant suddenly approached Emily's row. Excuse me, are you Emily Carter? Emily looked up, surprised. Yes. The attendant smiled politely. Mrs. Whitmore would like to see you in first class. Emily blinked. Me? Yes. Someone very important has been watching you this entire time. Confused but curious, Emily followed the attendant to the front of the plane. When she arrived, she saw Mrs. Whitmore sitting comfortably with a warm smile waiting for her. Emily, dear, she said, come sit with me for a moment. Emily sat down across from her. I hope I'm not disturbing you, Emily said. Not at all. Mrs. Whitmore studied her face again, the same thoughtful look from earlier returning. You helped me today without asking for anything in return, she said quietly. Emily shrugged. It was just the right thing to do. The old woman nodded slowly. Not everyone believes that anymore. Then she leaned forward slightly and said something that made Emily's heart skip. There's something you should know about me. Emily waited. The old woman's eyes sparkled gently. The truth is, I wasn't traveling alone today. Emily frowned. But I thought. Mrs. Whitmore smiled. Oh no, dear. She gestured toward the front of the cabin. Emily slowly turned in her seat, following the direction of Mrs. Whitmore's gesture. At the front of the first-class cabin, a tall man in a dark suit was standing quietly near the aisle. He looked to be in his early 50s, with silver hair and calm, observant eyes. The moment their gazes met, he offered Emily a respectful nod and began walking toward them. Emily felt a sudden rush of confusion. Who is that? She asked softly. Mrs. Whitmore smiled gently. That is my son. The man reached them and extended his hand. Hello, Emily. My name is Daniel Whitmore. Emily shook his hand politely, still unsure what was happening. Nice to meet you. But something about the name made her pause. It sounded familiar. Very familiar. Daniel Whitmore sat down beside his mother. I want to thank you, he said sincerely, for helping my mother today. Emily looked between them. You're welcome, but it really wasn't a big deal. Daniel smiled slightly. Actually, it was. Mrs. Whitmore patted Emily's hand. My son worries about me traveling alone. So today he asked the airport staff to quietly observe and make sure everything went smoothly. Emily's eyes widened. Wait, you mean all those employees earlier? Daniel nodded. Yes, they were simply making sure my mother was safe. Emily still didn't fully understand. Why would the airport do that? Daniel hesitated for a moment before answering. Well, the company I run owns a large portion of this airline. Emily blinked in shock. You're serious? Mrs. Whitmore chuckled softly. My son is too modest to say it himself. Daniel sighed with a small smile. I'm the CEO of Whitmore Aviation. Emily's mouth fell open. She had definitely heard of that company. Whitmore Aviation was one of the largest airline groups in the United States. Suddenly everything made sense. The staff, the attention, the first-class treatment. Emily felt a little embarrassed. I had no idea. That's exactly the point, Mrs. Whitmore said warmly. You helped me without knowing who I was. Daniel leaned forward slightly. My mother insisted on traveling. Through the airport. Like any other passenger today. She wanted to see how people treat someone who appears ordinary. Emily nodded slowly. And most people ignored you. Mrs. Whitmore gave a small, sad smile. Yes. Daniel added quietly, but you didn't. For a moment, silence filled the small cabin area. Then Daniel spoke again. My mother has spent her life supporting hospitals and charities. When she told me about you, I asked the staff to look into your background. Emily's heart skipped nervously. My background. Daniel nodded. You're a nurse who volunteers at free clinics, works double shifts, and still helps strangers at airports. Emily blushed slightly. I just try to do my job. Daniel smiled. That's more than most people do. Mrs. Whitmore squeezed Emily's hand. You reminded me that kindness still exists. But Emily still didn't understand why they were telling her all this. Then Daniel said something that changed everything. And that's why we'd like to offer you something in return. Emily felt her heart start to race. Offer me something. She repeated slowly. Daniel Whitmore nodded calmly, while his mother watched Emily with the same warm, knowing smile. Yes, Daniel said. But before I explain, there's something you should understand. Emily listened carefully, unsure what was about to happen. My mother has supported medical charities for over 30 years. Daniel continued. Hospitals, community clinics, scholarship funds for young doctors and nurses. Helping people has always been important to her. Mrs. Whitmore chuckled softly. Healthcare workers deserve far more appreciation than they receive. Emily shifted in her seat, feeling slightly overwhelmed. I'm really grateful for that, she said. But I don't see how I fit into all this. Daniel leaned forward slightly. When my mother told me about you, I asked our team to do some research. We discovered something interesting. Emily swallowed nervously. You've been working at a small clinic that's dangerously close to shutting down due to lack of funding. Emily's eyes widened. That's true. The clinic where she worked helped hundreds of low-income patients every month, but they constantly struggled to keep the doors open. Supplies were limited, equipment was outdated, and the staff was always stretched thin. Daniel nodded. We also learned that you've been organizing small fundraisers just to keep it running. Emily looked down, slightly embarrassed. It's not much, but it helps. Mrs. Whitmore gently lifted Emily's chin so she would look at her. Kindness doesn't have to be big to matter. Daniel then pulled a thin envelope from his jacket pocket and placed it on the table between them. Inside was a document. Emily looked at it carefully. Her eyes widened as she read the numbers printed on the page. This can't be real. Daniel smiled. It is. The document confirmed a $5 million donation to Emily's community clinic. Emily felt tears instantly fill her eyes. With this funding, Daniel explained, the clinic can expand, hire more staff, and serve thousands more patients. Emily covered her mouth in disbelief. But why me? Mrs. Whitmore squeezed her hand one more time. Because kindness deserves to grow. Daniel nodded. You helped someone you thought was just an old woman with a heavy suitcase. Emily laughed through her tears. Well, you were. Mrs. Whitmore grinned playfully. Yes, but I was also someone who needed a reminder that humanity still cares. Emily looked down at the donation paper again, her hands trembling, all because she had stopped to help a stranger. As the plane continued flying high above the clouds, Mrs. Whitmore said softly, sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest miracles. Emily nodded, wiping her tears. And in that moment, she realized something powerful. Helping others had never made her rich, but somehow it had just changed thousands of lives.